So next, I'd like to welcome back Hugh Evans, who is the director of the Advisors Toolbox and is here to give an update on the new general advice case note tool. Hugh, it's really great to have you back.
Thank you. Yes, so the sort of point of this software is that if a client is consulting an advisor, not necessarily a lawyer, but an advisor for legal advice, how do they know that the advice is correct and complete? So, we all know that there's really quite serious implications of getting advice wrong, and usually the answer to how they know that the advice is actually correct is that the organization has some kind of accreditation. But what does that even mean? I mean, it's not always immediately obvious to the client, but those of us in the industry know that that means someone is auditing them. But the auditor isn't actually in the room; they're reading the advice later. So and in fact, they're reading notes written by the advisor, and writing these notes is a task that can take a very long time. So, and that's the sort of that time taken to write case notes for advice is really uh, the issue that I'm trying to solve with this particular piece of software. So it covers a wide range of inquiry areas and allows even a relatively inexperienced advisor to ask the right questions and document all the answers. The tool in turn generates a complete and detailed exploration for the advice notes, and that can be added to or amended by the advisor afterwards. And this process improves both the quality and the notes of the notes and of the advice itself. As a case study, I know that one advisor using this at Citizens Advice BCP is able to complete a set of case notes in about 5 minutes using the software. Though obviously that's dependent on the complexity of the case. So last time I presented slides, this time I'm keen to show the tool itself in action. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. Here we go. There, can people see my website on that?
Yes, we can.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. Okay, great. So we start off with uh, just three questions, and these are very broad questions, and the rest of the questions will be added as we go along in response to answers to these initial questions. And you can see that we've got a space, a large sort of largely blank space on the right here, and that's where the case notes are going to appear. So if I answer this second question, skipping over questions about referrals, um, and say that the client has presented and said they want to know about benefits, so we select benefits general entitlement, um, then you can see that it's starting to populate uh, the list with more questions, and it's writing up a sketch of some case notes on the right here. So um, we um, we sorry. Um, so obviously we need to know who the client's living with. So maybe they're living on their own and it will write that. Maybe they have a partner that doesn't live with them and it will write that, not resident in their home. If we say they're not pregnant, it doesn't write that because we don't need to know explicitly that they're not pregnant. It becomes relevant if they are. If we say they're pregnant, it will add in the line and so on. I won't go through all of these because it's obviously quite a long form and I'm conscious of time. But you can see that we then have questions about wages. They might be paid for weekly, say £600 for weekly part-time work, and so on. We we eventually get to questions about benefits themselves, and maybe they're on pension credits, um, or whatever benefit they happen to be on. We can enter that. It's a structured list. So um, if if we answer, say, legacy benefits, it will inquire about legacy benefits in more detail following on from that, and so on. But we all know as advisors that things are rarely so simple. So what I want to demonstrate here is that we can actually pivot the inquiry onto a different advice area. So here we have more questions about benefits. We have questions about housing because that's often linked to benefits. But then maybe they explain that they're expecting bailiffs any minute. So so debt is often dealt with by a specialist, but a debt emergency like imminent bailiff visits are usually dealt with by the generalist advisor. So we'll say that they wish to answer questions about debt, yes, and we then get the notes explaining that it's not entirely that your job to do that as a generalist, but we can enter how much money the client owes in total if they know. We can say the debts are owed jointly with someone else or not, as the case may be. We can say that the debts are not in the name of the company. And then we have all the debt emergency questions, such as bailiff action. We'll say there's bailiff action in this case. And as soon as the earliest a bailiff could arrive at the client's home, say 2 days' time, they tend to leave this late. I can put the name of a bailiff firm in, have they entered the client's home already? All of these questions that are pertinent to a bailiff visit. So we can change the question list at the top level to be a debt emergency inquiry from the start, but we can also just add in debt questions, discrimination questions, anything else that's needed to sort of get the full picture of whatever the client happens to be talking about, and write a sort of full exploration of the client's case here. I'm sure you get the idea of what we're doing now. So the last thing I'd like to show you is that when we get to the bottom of the page, there is an edit document button. I've removed the downloaders.txt file because that tended to open in Microsoft Notepad, which wasn't terribly helpful. So I've added in this button, and you can just edit that, the notes that have been generated here. We also have validate answers. This just checks that all the questions have been answered, though in practice that's not always necessary for obvious reasons. Do we have time for some questions? I'll stop sharing there.
Yes, we do have time. I don't see anything popping up in the chat, but if anyone has any questions that they'd like to take live or that they'd like to add in the chat, we do have a couple minutes.
Okay.
You see if I don't see any hands. Feel free to jump in if you do have a question.
Okay. Obviously, this is a sort of paid for platform aimed at advice agencies. It's I should have probably started with that, but yeah, this is aimed at advice agencies rather than at the client at the moment. It's at the back of my mind that actually a lot of this could be done by the client, and possibly there should be a version of this for sending emails to advice agencies as well, so that they can have all the details on hand and reply in that way. But that's what I'm working on at the moment. Details of costs. Yeah, at the moment I'm charging £10 a month for each seat, one advisor, one seat. That's the pricing at the moment. I'm not sure whether I'm going to have to increase or indeed decrease that in the future, but that's where I'm keeping the price point at the moment for this.
Great, thank you. Well, if we don't have, do we have any more questions before we move on? Oh yeah, I see one from Ian. Is it part of an overall contact management system?
No, and no, it's not. And in fact, how can I put this? This doesn't actually store the case notes at all. It doesn't. It's to be used alongside a contact management or case management system. So the advisor will take those notes from that edit box, and then they will then copy them across into their contact management system. And this is also quite an important point from a GDPR perspective, because I'm not actually storing any client data at all, and that's absolutely deliberate. My system is completely blind to it. Everything's being processed client side so you don't actually need a GDPR data sharing agreement with my organization to use this. You can that part of it just isn't important because I'm not actually privy to any of the information that's entered into this software.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, if
Thank you.
anyone has further questions for Hugh, please do put them in the chat. For now, I'm thrilled to be joined by Kaylee Richardson, who is an associate professor of law at Northumbria University. She'll be presenting on 2 funded access to justice projects, a domestic abuse survivor vlog and a legal pathways app. Thank you so much, Kaylee.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is much more early on than some of the projects that you've already heard of, and this is a bit more of a watch this space pitch, and hopefully I'll be coming back to actually show you how some of these tech projects might work. So I'm from Northumbria University. Up until last week, I was director of our student law office, which is a pro bono clinic based at Northumbria. We offer free legal advice and, in appropriate cases, representation across a number of different areas of law. I can provide a link to our website if anyone's interested in that. And it does sort of link into some of these projects, and I'll address that as and when it comes up. The way that the student law office works is that we have students meeting with clients, providing the advice to them, but under the supervision of solicitors, barristers, and experienced caseworkers. But these projects came about because the number of inquiries we receive every year is astronomical. And part of that is because of the cuts to legal aid. So I very much experience similar to what Carrie was talking about before. We can only help so many people through the clinic. And so we started to look at what other resources can we help provide to people who are not eligible for legal aid or might not be eligible for legal aid and might be going through the court process on their own. So the first project is a CAPE funded project, and this is to produce vlogs aimed at survivors of domestic abuse who are going through family court proceedings on their own. Those vlogs have largely now been recorded. They're split into short digestible videos so that survivors can dip in and out as required. They can jump into the sections that are most applicable to the stage that they are currently at. There's 3 larger overarching sections: pre-proceedings, during proceedings, and post-proceedings. And that's important because the post-proceeding stage is often forgotten about, and for survivors of domestic abuse, proceedings might only be the start of a very long journey. So we wanted to make sure that we were addressing the post-proceedings support process as well. Those vlogs mainly focus on private children proceedings, but some elements of the vlogs are more widely applicable to wider family proceedings, such as the video that we've produced on different funding options. We've got 2 official partners on the project. Support Through Court is one of those partners, and Cardiff Women's Aid is the other partner. And we also co-produce these vlogs with survivors of domestic abuse. So we met with a number of survivors. They were paid for their involvement in the project. That all came through the CAPE funding, and they have informed the content because we wanted to know directly from them, okay, you've been through this process, what would have helped you? There's some delays caused by that because, and this is why we're not quite ready to launch at the moment, and that's because we've got a couple of survivors who wanted to talk directly about their experiences in the vlogs. Now, there's a number of issues with that from a reporting perspective because there's reporting restrictions in family court proceedings, which some of you might be aware of. So we're currently working with our university legal department to find a way to reflect those survivor experiences in a way that doesn't conflict with those reporting rules. So we want to get their experiences reflected through there. but we don't want to risk them potentially being in contempt of court. Legal have also been involved because we want to make sure that we're making clear that the vlogs are not a replacement or indeed designed to be legal advice. They are general guidance. But once they are signed off, they will be hosted on our Northumbria website and they will be free for people to access. We decided to host them ourselves and then provide links to other organisations so that they can link through, because that retains a level of control over the vlogs with us. And that's important in case any of the information in the videos becomes out of date, in which case we can quickly pull that video down and replace it with something else. And that's because we've noticed that there are a number of resources available on the internet that have become out of date and could be seen as being misleading. So we wanted to keep that level of control with us at Northumbria. But as I said, we will be partnering with other organisations to give them a link through to the videos. The second project is an Access to Justice app that we're currently in the early stages of developing. So this was funded by Innovation UK. We're partnered with Tabled on this, who are a tech company, and they're actually the tech company who provide our office case management system. Tabled are creating the technology behind the app, and then we provide the legal content. It will have a decision tree format, so it'll be similar to a flow chart with a series of specific questions, directing people to information that is then tailored to the answers that they have provided. But it will also direct them to a number of resources as well. This includes linking to reliable external resources such as the Government Legal Aid Calculator. And again, this came about because of the number of litigants in person that we are seeing coming through our office, mainly caused by the cuts to legal aid, and us just not being able to deal with the high number of inquiries that we're getting through the student law office in particular areas. And if we can't help someone because we're at capacity, we're quite often at a loss of where to send people to. And so this gives us at least a resource that we can direct those people to. Now, we accept there's a number of different resources available on the internet already. But what we've noticed with some of those sources is they're not always free. And a lot of the people that we hear from are struggling financially just to make ends meet. So they don't have the finances to pay for a resource or for legal advice. Or their claim may be at such a low value that it isn't proportionate to spend money on a resource to help, even if it's a small amount. There's also an issue with how up-to-date or reliable some of the free online resources are. Particularly when referencing things like court fees. I've had to contact a number of organisations to say, are you aware that the information you've got on your website is out of date? Sometimes as well, those resources will only deal with one aspect of the proceedings or the pre-proceedings process, so people might have to find their way around quite a number of different resources to get a comprehensive overview. And it's easy for them to get lost in that process or get referral fatigue. The idea with the app is that people can jump in and out of the decision trees as and when they need it, and it will save where they're up to. So, for example, they may jump out of the process to try something like mediation and then jump back in after the mediation process to either see through the decision tree how to make their agreement legally binding, or because mediation hasn't worked and they need to see what their next possible steps are. So to start with, the app is going to cover housing, small claims, divorce, and child arrangements. And the app will be completely free to use. This is a funded feasibility study, which is why we're starting with a small number of discrete areas. We're going to be testing the app through the Student Law Office with a small, where we'll get our student advisors to guide clients through that process in appropriate cases. We'll also be looking to partner with some other pro bono organisations to test how well this app might meet individual needs. Once we've tested the app, assuming we see benefits beyond what is already available to people, we'll then be looking to expand the content, and some of the things we're looking to do are to consider things like what has already been discussed on this meeting. So using AI or chatbots alongside the app. So we're in the very early stages and it is a feasibility study. So we're starting quite small, and then hopefully I'll be able to come back and talk to you a bit about the results of that feasibility study, but also potentially to present some of the vlogs as well. So that's all from me. I'm happy to answer any questions as they come up in the chat.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. Yes, we'd love to have you back at a future session to demonstrate anything that you have, or to share some of your findings. We do have a couple of extra minutes. If anybody has any questions for Kaylee, you're welcome to raise your hand now and we can answer them live, or pop them in the chat. So I'll just take a second to see if anything comes up. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next session. I don't see anything in the chat. Did anyone have any questions that they'd like to answer live before we move on? Okay, well, it looks like not yet, but please do, if you think of anything, please do put them in the chat, Kaylee. Hopefully you can pick those up if they come along. So next we will welcome Esther McConnell, who will be presenting on a project of the Greater London Authority, which is launching research around innovations that enable access to legal advice services for migrant communities. So, Esther.
Hi, Emily, and hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm just going to talk and ask some questions. Basically, I work for the Greater London Authority and the East European Resource Centre. At the Greater London Authority, we recently launched some research, which was done by Young Foundation and Flex, into migrant Londoners' experiences of work and accessing advice in London. The research had, a lot of the data was collected and analysed by peer researchers. And I think I really encourage reading it, and I'll share it after I stop speaking. It produced a really deep well of insights about the experiences of work, but also really importantly, the experiences of the advice sector and seeking advice here. Of course, migrant Londoners experience employment rights issues along a full spectrum, from fairly simple violations of their rights all the way through to exploitation and trafficking. And there's some really shocking accounts of that in the research. What I want to focus on today, perhaps, is more the barriers to accessing advice, because I think it's really important to all of our discussions about innovation, and also some of the recommendations that came directly from the participants and what that might mean for, for how we innovate in the advice sector. So the barriers were complicated and multifaceted, as you can imagine. There were practical barriers, these often related to capacity in the employment rights sector, which we've talked about today already, as well as capacity at the intersection of employment rights and immigration law, where lots of migrants who are experiencing employment rights issues will need support, where their employment status and their immigration status intersect. There were other practical barriers around getting in touch, navigating the sector, so finding the advice that's appropriate for them, experiencing language barriers, and crucially, in all of those things, whether or not you can navigate, whether you can speak the language, just not being able to find someone with capacity and the expertise to help in that situation. There were other barriers as well. Perhaps you would group them as personal and cultural barriers to accessing advice. This included the toll that employment rights abuse can take on people's mental health, and that limits people's capacity to then engage with advice or engage with their case. Experiencing stigma around seeking advice, experiencing prejudice from advisors about, their particular situation, or their nationality or whatever. Perhaps experiencing misunderstandings where though both speaking English, the way an issue might be expressed, might be understood very differently from the listener, you know, showing a bit of a cultural divide, and then that meaning they don't get the advice that they need. And then for migrant Londoners, there were lots of, you know, genuine and perceived fears around losing income, not being able to get new income, but also losing their immigration status with their employment, and so becoming subject of immigration enforcement, presenting a whole host of new risks. Yeah, so they need advice which is quick, because it's about employment rights, and we've heard today also that employment rights advice, the timelines are very short. They need advice that relates to employment, a complex area of law, as well as immigration, another extremely complicated area of law, and it needs to be linguistically and culturally accessible. At this point, I wanted to just sort of tell you some of the aspirations and recommendations that came from the participants in the research. But I actually, listening today, I think it's worth reflecting that some of those barriers that were identified in the research by migrant Londoners to accessing advice from people, perhaps those, you know, could easily be remade in tech solutions. So, for example, if everything's in English, then there could be language barriers, you know, for people that don't speak English, but also for people that speak English but perhaps don't have good technical English, or they're not hitting the right keywords for the tech to hear it and respond. There might be, you know, those cultural differences. There might be fears around, you know, who has that data, and what's going to happen with it once they've input it. And, you know, AI can sometimes, depending on how it's programmed, it can magnify prejudice that we have in society. So I think that that's a really interesting kind of aspect of these tech solutions, which are sort of a fantastic complementary, perhaps, push that we you know, we're embracing here. So back to the script. The participants and the peer researchers really drew out some particular recommendations. I mean, there's a huge amount of recommendations, but in this particular area, one of the things that they articulated for London in particular was that it would be good to have some kind of solutions that help to navigate the advice sector better, to be able to find good advice, to find advice that relates to their issues, and also to avoid bad advice. You know, there's a lot of advice sharks and poor quality advice out there. Another idea that came from the research was a centralized first point of contact for people seeking advice, which could be multilingual and could act as a kind of gateway. That, as a person in the advice sector, it's sort of mind-blowing to think about, because it's such a fractured sector. There's lots and lots of different organisations, there's governmental support, there's local councils, and you know, increasingly there's some tech solutions as well. So what would that look like? Can technology help us with that? And then something, I guess, that is already happening is they suggested a real desire for tech-based and app-based, text-based and app-based access to advice. So ways that they can get advice which is more, which is not so much on the phone or in person, but they can access in their own time. I suppose I really wanted to kind of share this research and present these findings and kind of highlight some of them, but also, you know, I'm really open to hearing if anyone is working in these areas, particularly around advice sector navigation and that sort of initial assessment point, or if people are thinking about how tech solutions can be accessible to a really diverse audience, including people with different languages, from different cultures, or with, and also thinking about how these new solutions might be able to facilitate intersection points. So, for example, employment rights and immigration rights, where there's a real intersection of, you know, that you need to be tackling both, because just one will not help the person necessarily. So I'm going to stop talking and share the link to the research. Really recommend reading it, and I'm totally open to questions or people getting in touch after also.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Let's see, we do have a minute if we wanted to take a question. I'm just looking in the chat quickly to see before we move on to our next session. Let's see. I don't see anything in the chat. I do see a comment from Victoria, which I'm sure you've seen, Esther. Did anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask live before we move on to our next speaker? Okay, well, if you think of anything, please do put it in there. Esther, thank you so much. It was really great to have you. So now we're going to move on to our last presenter. So I'm really thrilled to welcome back Martin Boyle, who is the VP of Transformation at Codebase. Martin will be presenting on LawTech Bridge, which brings together startups and established legal market players to share and build the tools, insights, and mindsets that drive innovation within the legal sector. Martin, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Emmeline, for having me along today. I thought I don't have a formal presentation to do. I think that's sometimes helpful, sometimes not helpful. But what I thought I would do is to talk a little bit around about some of the programs that we're running as our consortium with Legal Geek, which is the LawTech UK program. So I'll do a little bit of context setting, and then we can talk specifically about the program or the programs if that's of interest, and then I'm very happy to take questions from the end. Emmeline, how long would you like me to talk for, just so I've got a bit of time, because I could go on for an hour or I could do 5 minutes, whatever you prefer.
Well, the session ends at 11:30, so we have about 10 to 12 minutes.
No worries. So let's get stuck in with I'll do 10 minutes and just keep an eye on the time. So I'm back, so thank you for having me for a second time round. I think the last time I was here, I was sort of trying to tantalize people with what was coming in the future, and now we've actually started to deliver some programs. The LawTech UK is a consortium, as I said, between Legal Geek and Codebase. Legal Geek are organizing the events and the community element of this, and there's lots of that going on. You can check that out on the lawtechuk.io website that I've just put into the chat. And Codebase is responsible for the education programs that run alongside that. We've got 3 specific programs. They are called LawTech Fundamentals, LawTech Build, and LawTech Scale, and they're designed for early stage startup companies. They take you from a place where you are a pre-founder, have an idea for a LawTech solution, which can be in the access to justice space, or it can be in big law. I think it doesn't really matter, and that takes you through the playbooks that software product companies would use to kind of start and test a hypothesis and an idea. The first one, Fundamentals, is self-guided. All of them are free to access. The first one is free to access and self-guided. Online, 2 modules are up just now. The next 5 modules are going to be posted as we go into the rest of the year. I would encourage you to have a look at that if you've ever had an idea to launch a tech product that you just don't know how to do it. It takes you through some of the ideation phases. And my colleague Kath has started our first module of a program called LawTech Builder today, which is designed for people who have gone through the fundamentals and are looking to build out their proposition all the way through to having something called a minimum viable product, which is low cost. And then our final one, which will run for the startup only program, which runs after the year, is called LawTech Scaler. And LawTech Scaler is designed for people who already have something and they want to take it to market. I think perhaps one thing which is a bit more interesting to this audience is our program, which is called LawTech Bridge. LawTech Bridge takes people who are already established in the marketplace, companies with tenure. We call them incumbent companies, and those incumbent companies can be they can be law firms, they can be in-house people, they can be third sector, they can be charities. The kind of the thread that runs through all of them is that they're established, that they work in an environment which is quite well structured, that there's a framework in place, and that they're pointed at a goal which has already been defined, as opposed to a startup, which is a company which works in an environment of uncertainty and trying to find the solution to a problem that they've identified using normally technology. Our bridge program brings together those two audiences, so incumbents as we call them, but I think that's just really a catch-all because there isn't a name for established companies, which is shorthand, with startups. And what we try to do is we try to build relationships between the startups and the incumbent companies who are all actively trying to solve problems in the space of law. And those problems can be productivity tools for big law, for sure, but they can also be access to justice contentions equally well. I think one of the questions that we're asked most frequently about, or how can you go about building something which is assumed to be accessed for free without investment? And I think that's one of the questions that we would seek to answer, is that how do you go about building a low cost, low risk product which has high levels of utility that the market really wants without having access to private funding or public funding. What we see the outcomes for these being is that actually in our LawTech Bridge programs, there are very specific outcomes that a startup can achieve, which is that you get to see other startups who are maybe a bit further ahead than you, to give you a bit of confidence that the problems that you're facing just now are not unique to you and that they're all surmountable. And then the second one is that if you're lucky, you might find somebody who's interested in collaborating and partnering with you to facilitate a customer for you, or just to facilitate growth for your company. As I said at the beginning of my little monologue here, all these are funded by LawTech UK, which is funded by the Ministry of Justice. So their only commitment in terms of cost is time. And again, to just mark everyone's cards in terms of the time commitment, the LawTech Bridge program, the time commitment from a turning up and doing stuff perspective is about 2.5 hours every session, and there are 7 sessions. So if you're worried about, having to go on an accelerator program, which is going to require you to move to a building somewhere in a city and be there for 4 weeks on the trot, that's absolutely taken into consideration, and we don't do that. And the secondary part of it is that we run them all online on Zoom, exactly as you do, so that they're as accessible as they can be, as long as you've got access to an internet connection and a laptop, and also accessible to people from wherever they happen to be across the UK. We are finally, before I open up to any questions, is that we're still open to startups and incumbent companies joining. If you follow the link that I posted in the chat through to programs and scroll down that page to LawTech Bridge, you can find out more specifically about the program, including the curriculum, the application deadline dates, and the start dates for the program. So happy to take questions for anybody who has them, or comments.
Thank you so much, Martin. That sounds great. I see that there's already a question in the chat, but really quickly before we address that, I just wanted to ask a question or two. First, from our end, so we know that you're keen to see charities represented in the LawTech Bridge program. Is there any specific support or guidance that you could offer to frontline organizations who want to take part?
In LawTech Bridge, I think the first thing is to have a look at the proposition and apply. One of the barriers is people really just kind of being a bit reluctant to put themselves forward. I don't think there is a sweet spot in terms of the type of company or your level of maturity or the product that you're trying to build. As long as you have ambition to build something which is in the LawTech space, there's quite a high level of likelihood that we'll either accept you or we'll point you at something else. So bearing in mind that there are 3 other education programs, and we have a roster of mentors who can also help early stage companies, I would say that stepping forward, filling in the application form and getting some feedback is a pretty decent first step.
Great, thank you so much. And I see that you answered Ian's question. We had another question for you that we were keen to have you answer. So is there anything about the technology that frontline legal advice organizations develop and use that you're particularly excited to explore?
I think that what we're really excited to explore is anybody who's got a problem that needs to be solved. So I think that one of the things that Codebase isn't particularly wedded to is the type of technological solution, more that people are trying to solve problems. One of the ways that we frame this, Emmeline, is that we say that we like people who are in love with the problem rather than the solution. So we are not a technology provider. We don't advocate for any particular type of technology, any back end, any front end. We don't develop technology ourselves. What we try to do is we try to point people in the direction of others who have done this before them, to give them practical advice as to how they might do it in the lowest risk, lowest cost, and the highest utility way.
Great, thank you so much, Martin. We do have a few extra minutes here, so if there was any questions for Martin, or Martin, if there was anything that you wanted to add that you feel like you weren't able to address. I see there's a question from Miri here. Do startups in this space have experience working with charities?
So I think that we are, the startups in this space will be used to working in, the answer to that question is no. I think I was going to be indirect, but the answer to that question is I don't think they'll have direct experience of working with charities. But the great thing about technologists is that they are able to point their technology at multiple solutions. So one of the things I would say about being wary of joining things like that is that startups are really just looking for domain expertise. So they probably are very good problem solvers. So if you have identified a problem that you're looking to solve and you are looking for a ready-made solution, it probably doesn't exist. But if you're happy to share that problem with a group of people who are able to point their technology and their capability at helping you to solve that, then that's probably better for both parties. I think if you're out there looking for technology that already exists, and I've done this as a buyer of technology, you're always making compromises because the thing that somebody else has been built for a different situation. So without having any more context from Miri's question, is that I don't know that they will have specific experience of working with charities, but I'm not sure that it actually matters from a superficial perspective, not knowing anything about the product.
Great, thank you. Did we have any other questions here? It looks like there's a question from Giannis. Asking about if their Scalar program would be a fit.
So Scalar program, likely, I think that the best thing to do with the Scalar program, so the Scalar program is not going to kick off until either January or February in 2024. So it's not got the fullest of my attention just now because we're doing the other 3 programs right now, Giannis. Have a look at the Scalar program that's in the link that I sent through. You can scroll down to all of the programs if you go to that link I sent higher up in the chat, find programs and scale, it'll give you the information that you need for that. And then if you need to have a chat with one of the team here about your product and its fit, then I'm sure that we can facilitate that via Emmeline.
Yeah, so for anyone who might want to get in touch, please do reach out to me, and I'm happy to make those connections with Martin or with anyone else that was here today. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and like I said, I'm happy to get everyone connected. Was there any other questions here before we wrap up? Or Martin, did you have any last thoughts?
No, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to take a final question if anybody wants to put one in the chat.
Give it a second and see, or if anyone wanted to raise their hand and ask live, you're welcome to do so as well. Not seeing anything come through yet.
And then the final thing for me is that thanks to everybody for being patient and listening. That this is quite a kind of a specific audience. If you are having conversations with people in your networks who you think would be interested in the programs that we offer, remember that they're fully funded. So as I said previously, the only commitment is time. They're going to run for this year and probably into next year too. So there is a sort of a very specific and time-boxed opportunity for people to participate without money changing hands. So that kind of is a big motivator from our perspective.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Martin. It doesn't look like we have any more questions, so I guess we'll be doing our wrap up a minute or two early. So I just wanted to once again extend a huge thank you to all of our amazing contributors today. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your learnings and experience with the rest of the community. And also thanks to all those who shared via the chat function too. We'll be sure to use that as our follow-up. Our next session of JIG will be held on Thursday, the 7th of December at the same time, so 10 to 11:30 a.m. This is currently a free session, so please do have a think about what you'd like to see, share, and discuss next time. If there are particular projects that you'd like insight on or issues that you'd like to explore, we can help curate the session around that. Finally, I would like to flag that we have an upcoming Insights and Learning session as well, which will be held on Tuesday, the 24th of October from 10 to 11:30. this is going to be a really interesting session on signposting and referrals. So please do get in touch with myself if you would like a link to register. And other than that, I hope everyone has a lovely rest of their week and stays cool in the heat. Thank you so much for coming. It was great to see everybody.